Hello, everybody, and welcome to the European Marine Board's third Thursday Science webinar. My name is Sheila Heymans. I am the Executive Director of the European Marine Board, and I will be your moderator today. Just quickly, some housekeeping rules. Please make sure that your name is clearly entered into Zoom so that we can know who's asking the questions. If you do have questions, please use the Q&A, which should be at the bottom of your screen to know to ask your questions, and to please put also in there what your organization is and which country you're from. I will select the questions and speak them verbally to the speaker. If you have any technical issues, please use the chat function, and please be aware that the webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our website and on our YouTube channel. So the title of today's webinar is Valuing Ecosystem-Based Fisheries Management in Malta. It's about a discrete choice experiment to elicit preferences and willingness to pay. It is linked to the EcoScope Project, a project that the Marine Board Secretariat is part of. And our speaker today is Gilmour Camilleri, who is the Chief Economist at the Malta Fiscal Advisory Council and a PhD student in economics at the University of Malta. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Gilmour, if you can start sharing your screen and take it away, that'd be great. Thanks. You are muted.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, it's good. Perfect.
Yeah, I think it's not quite in full screen mode, so I don't know if you can make it a bit bigger. But yeah, maybe it is just because it's a PDF.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it should be fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, good afternoon. My name is Gilmour Camilleri, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Malta. And today I will be presenting some of the research findings from one of the papers forming part of my doctoral studies in economics, supervised by Professor Marie Briguglio and Professor Anna Cecik. Before I begin, I would like to sincerely thank the organizing committee of the European Marine Board for giving me the opportunity to share my work with such a distinguished audience of experts. So what we did in the study? So in the study, we sought to understand public preferences and willingness to pay for adopting ecosystem-based fisheries management in Malta, which is a management approach that moves beyond the conventional focus of managing fish stocks in isolation and instead adopts a holistic perspective that integrates the broader marine ecosystem into fisheries management. At the outset, I would like to say that the data which was used by the study was collected as part of the EcoScope project, in which I was also part of the research team from the University of Malta. So, the background and motivation of the study. So, we all know how important oceans are and the marine ecosystem services they provide for sustaining life on Earth, be it for oxygen generation, be it for food provision, buffering from global temperature increases. However, over the years, we also know that these services have been under constant pressure from human activities, and they are projected to continue increasing. Such pressures are set to continue increasing, given the expanding economies and expanding populations. And one of the primary reasons as to why such negative consequences have been occurring is due to our narrow focus on single sectors of activity while neglecting marine ecosystems as interconnected wholes. And one area where this has happened is actually in fisheries management. And as economists, we usually attribute this to two main factors. First, you have the absence of property rights, because over here we're talking about open access fisheries that are based on common pool resources that render them susceptible to overexploitation. And the second factor is the inability to internalize externalities. That is, any damage done by fishing actors utilizing marine resources has to be borne by society at large. And this leads to what Hardin in 1963 coined as the tragedy of the commons. And in fishing, this is manifested as overfishing, illegal fishing, etc. And with this background in mind, what we did is we've employed a stated preference methodology, a discrete choice experiment, to value the potential implementation of ecosystem-based fisheries management in Malta, a country that currently does not employ a BFM. So this study makes the following 5 contributions. If I had to summarize, so from an academic perspective, as I was reading through, the literature in this area, it became apparent that while the use of discrete choice experiment for environmental valuation has increased throughout the years, applications in marine contexts remain underrepresented, at least when compared to terrestrial counterparts. And even more, choice experiments for evaluating the adoption of a BFM emerge as an even more elusive area within the existing body of literature. And we have also noticed that the few studies that have attempted to do this, at least in their majority, they adopt a very narrowly defined interpretation of what a BFM is. And often they tended to overlook certain criteria on the BFM checklist, such as, for example, inclusive management. Okay? The study, at least to our knowledge, is also the first empirical valuation of a BFM within the Mediterranean context of Malta. Malta, as you all know, it's a large ocean state, which sort of the study also provides the platform, the groundwork to apply a similar framework to other small island states. Now, the emphasis on small island states is obviously due to their higher reliance on the fisheries sector and also the relatively high vulnerability to marine ecosystem stressors. And this also contributes, the study also contributes to the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. So, some tasters of the results. So, we did find that people are willing to pay for ecosystem-based fisheries management in Malta, at least the majority of respondents, around 80%. And for, they're willing to pay a premium for fish, which carry one or more BFM labels. And this premium was between 25 to 63% of the original price of an unlabeled alternative. That is, a fish which carry one or more a BFM label, its price was between 125 to 163% of the original price of an unlabeled alternative. So, some literature. So, we all know that the effective application of a BFM hinges on the value of marine ecosystem services, okay, and which according to the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment of 2003, there are basically 4 main types of services which are provided by marine ecosystems. The first one is provisioning services. So over here we are talking about marine renewables, non-renewable resources which are extracted from marine environments, such as, for example, mineral fuels, biological stocks such as fish, mollusks, etc. What we usually refer to as the direct use values. And then there are 3 other types of services. There are regulating services, which are the benefits that arise from ecosystem-mediated processes, such as, for example, climate regulation and carbon sequestration. There are cultural services, that is, the intangible values ecosystems provide, such as, for example, cultural identity, spiritual fulfillment, aesthetic appreciation, and supporting services, which underpin all ecosystem functions, such as, for example, nutrient cycling. So, we're saying that the majority of the benefits which are found under the regulating, cultural, and supporting services, these are actually non-market services. That is, they are not traded in any market, and therefore we can't observe a relative measure of their value, their price. We can't observe, for example, people's preferences or trade-offs for these kind of services, and the result, in order to come up with a value for these types of services, we have to resort to stated preference methods. And one popular method in this sphere is the Discrete Choice Experiment, which involves generating and analyzing choice data through hypothetical scenarios using a survey. So in this type of surveys, respondents are presented with multiple choice sets, choice cards basically, with each choice card having more than one option, and they are basically asked to select their preferred choice. So if I had to explain this via an easy example, imagine, for example, that I am doing a study to elicit whether respondents are willing to switch to tram in order to travel to their work location. Okay, it is hypothetical because in Malta we don't have any trams. And let's say that, for example, the options I provide to my respondents, the other different modes of transport, are the bus and the private car. So what I would do in these kinds of experiments is I would present the attributes of these three of alternatives, okay, the tram, the bus, and the car, each of which would have varying levels. So for example, one important attribute would be, for example, the time it takes to go to work, including an waiting time. So obviously the different modes of transport would have different arrival times. Another attribute, for example, could be the level of privacy. So for example, if you're traveling with your private car, you can select the most preferred route. You can listen to your favorite radio station. You can opt to stay quiet, whereas, with the other options, you are commuting with a group of people, and therefore the level of privacy is definitely sort of lower than when using your private car. And for example, the amount of walking you have to do to reach your final destination. So for example, if you're traveling by private car, you can work in your works parking area, whereas with the other options, you have to, for example, stop at the nearest station, and then you need to do some walking to reach your final destination. You would also have the price as one of the attributes. So sticking to the same example, so for example, the car might be the most convenient in terms of privacy, the most convenient in the fact that you don't have to do any walking because you can stop at your works parking area, but most probably it is going to take the longest to reach your final destination, especially during rush hours because of traffic congestions, and it is also most probably the most expensive option of all. Now, this price variable is actually very important, and there is a whole literature as to how you would go to design a choice experiment and how to work out the different price options, which due to time constraints, I would not go into in this presentation. But what I can say is that after you collect all the data and you run your regressions and you come up with all the coefficients, you can use the coefficients with the different attributes, including the different levels, and the coefficient on price to work out the inferred willingness to pay estimates. And sort of similar to the transport example, where we had basically 4 attributes. We had price, the level of privacy, the amount of walking time, and the total amount of time it would take you to reach the final destination. Over here, we needed to come up with a set of attributes which we can use to comprehensively define what a BFM is. And again, there's a whole set of literature which attempts to do this, to influential papers in this area are the Long et al. 2015 paper and the Truchta et al. 2018 paper. For example, if I recall well, the Truchta et al. Paper, they define 18 pillars of what a comprehensive definition of a BFM, should constitute. So what we needed to do over here is we needed to come up with a method as to how we can, summarize those sort of 18 pillars into something which can be manageable to put in a survey to work out the choice experiment. And in doing this, we also have looked at different literature which have taken different pillars of what a BFM is, and we've conducted sort of an analysis of the different willingness to pay estimates which they found. For example, the Fernandos Polanco paper did something in relation to sustainability. The Root et al. Paper did something on, the willingness to pay that people were willing to pay in order to ensure that the fishing activity minimizes the impact on both the local and the global environment, etc. And we took note of these premiums. I have already noted that the research study is Malta. I'm sure you know this, but Malta is a small island state in the Mediterranean, with a relatively, at least when compared to its European counterparts, it has a high reliance on the marine and coastal community. So in relative terms, you have quite a big fishing and aquaculture sector, coastal tourism sector, etc. And also due to our small island state characteristics, we are also more prone to climate change impacts. In particular, something which also makes the study more relevant is that Malta is situated in the heart of the Mediterranean. And we all know that the Mediterranean is basically one of the most overfished seas. So approximately 75% of its fish population is overexploited. And this obviously makes our study more relevant. So similar to the transport example, what I needed to do is to first and foremost establish what the hypothetical scenario is going to be. We had a discussion at length in the EcoScope project and the consortium of partners, which we were, and we basically have come up with this hypothetical scenario. So we've asked respondents, imagine you are buying dolphin fish. Now, dolphin fish is a type of fish species in Malta. It's not the actual dolphin that is the most popular, but it is a particular fish species in Malta which is very popular, especially during these days. So imagine you are buying this type of fish from your usual retailer, okay? And there are a number of options, a number of dolphin fish which are labeled to reflect distinct EBFM attributes. Okay, so in this experiment, respondents were presented with the same fish, the same fish species, the same size, but harvested by different fisheries, each bearing unique label or labels representing EBFM attributes set at varying levels. And each fish option featured obviously a distinct price. What were these attributes? Okay, so the first attribute which we've used was sustainable harvesting, meaning no overfishing. This attribute had two levels. I would, for simplicity terms, refer to as sort of the medium option and the high option. So if a fish has this medium sustainable harvesting label, it means that, the way in which this fish was caught ensures that dolphin fish stocks remain productive and healthy enough to allow the same fishing outtake to continue in the future. Okay, just in case it has sort of the higher option of this particular attribute, it means that we are also allowing for a safety buffer, okay? So the first attribute which we've used in this study is sustainable harvesting. The second one is marine life protection, okay? So if the dolphin fish has this label, it means that the way in which this fish was caught ensures that any impact on sensitive marine habitats and vulnerable species is minimized, okay? If it has the high option, it means that any impact on all marine habitats and other species was minimized, okay? This was the second attribute. The third attribute was climate friendly, which means that basically if the dolphin fish has this level, the expedition which ultimately resulted in this particular fish being caught, the fishing vessel that was used was in line with sort of climate-friendly standards. The high option is even more climate-friendly. And over here, we have also provided the respondent sort of an example of the amount of CO2 emissions which are generated from a liter of gasoline. The fourth attribute is inclusive management. So if a dolphin fish has this label, it means that, the fisheries management publicly provided comprehensive information on management decisions. If it had the highest level, it means that even the community stakeholders were involved in the management decisions. And finally, the price attribute, which featured four different levels, okay? The way as to how these levels were chosen were also in line with literature, okay? What I wanted to emphasize at this stage is that along the choice experiments, these attributes and their levels, they were thoroughly explained to the respondents. And also the respondents, as they were answering the choice experiment, they also had the facility to revert back to the explanation in case they required. Okay. So to summarize, this choice experiment had 5 attributes: so sustainable stock, marine life protection, community involvement, climate friendly, and price. 4 attributes had 2 levels, whereas the price attribute had 4 levels, okay? If you had to work out all the possible fish options, okay, from these 5 attributes, you would have nearly 400 different options, which obviously this cannot be tested because ultimately you need to remember that for each different fish option, you need to collect a number of different responses in order to be able to conduct regression analysis and ultimately infer the willingness to pay estimates. So we needed to come up with a method as to how we could summarize the 400 different fish options into something which is manageable without incurring any information losses. And for this purpose, we use the Bayesian de-efficient design. Okay, the Bayesian de-efficient design gave us sort of the optimal design, gave us a heterogeneous design of 36 different choice cards. Okay, but even 36 we thought, it's still quite a high number. Let me show you an example of what a choice card is. Okay, so each choice card has 3 different fish options. The first 2, they reflect unique label or more than one unique BFM labels, whereas fish C is always the status quo option, okay, the original unlabeled alternative, okay? But imagine, even if you had to answer 36 different choice cards, it was still going to be too lot for your respondents to, to make sure that they have till the very end of the choice experiments maintained, rigor in answering all the different choice cards. So most probably they would have answered the first 15, 20 perhaps, and then at a point in time they start sticking answers all over the place. Okay, so what we did in this case, we randomly split our respondents into 4 blocks. So we took these 36 optimal heterogeneous choice cards which were given to us by the Bayesian the efficient design. We randomly split them into 4 blocks so that each respondent was answering 9 choice cards. Okay, we did conduct a pilot study both in English and Maltese, and we've targeted a pilot test sample size of approximately 10% of what we were targeting as the full sample. Okay, and we use this information apart from the usual, to make sure that all the questions are comprehensible, all the questions are clear, etc. We also use that information, we conducted an analysis of the responses which we gathered in order to gather what are known as information priors, which these were used also when designing ultimately the choice experiment. Beyond the choice experiment, the questionnaire also included questions about, for example, the respondents' socio-demographics, fish consumption habits, perceptions of fishery impacts, etc. Okay, we've collected a representative sample, which is based on age, gender, district of reference, and education level from 503 respondents. So this means that for the choice experiment, given that each respondent was answering 9 choice cards, we have 500 respondents answering the questionnaire. Each respondent is answering 9 choice cards, so the full sample size for the choice experiment is 4,500 valid observations. The margin of error was also well below the literature standards. For the analysis, 2 models were employed, the multinomial logit model as our base model, and also the mixed logit model. The mixed logit model was employed because basically the basic model suffers from 2 main limitations, which are the IIA property and the fact that you can't capture heterogeneity across respondents. So the mixed logit model is the more state-of-the-art model to use in this case. And we have basically assumed Lancaster's theory of demand. Basically, this theory states that respondents derive utility not from the good itself, so not from the fact that I am choosing the tram over the private car, but from the attributes of the different options. So from the fact that the tram is faster, has a lower traveling time than your private car, or for example, the fact that it is cheaper than the private car. So it is not from the good itself, but from the attributes of the goods. And we have also employed the random utility model framework, where in our Y variable we have the choice that respondents made, and then we have the different attributes of this study. So we've employed regressions in order to come up with an estimate of the coefficient values. In terms of descriptive statistics, so as I told you, we've gathered a lot of information from this questionnaire. In terms of socio-demographic variables, more or less everything was in line with population data, except for the fact that we had a slightly younger population in our sample, okay, and slightly more educated as well when compared to the Maltese population, which is perfectly normal when you are conducting an online survey. And we have also asked about the frequency of fish consumption, which in Malta we found it to be somewhere between weekly and monthly. We have also controlled for the different trust level and, for example, to what extent the respondents consider themselves to be pro-environment or worry about climate changes, and also a range of fishery policy preferences. So, for example, in this case, what was interesting was the fact that in Malta, people are mostly concerned about the impact of fishing on the local economy, as opposed to, for example, on climate or on sustainable stock or on marine life protection, which is evident by that higher mean over there, the 3.4, relative to the 2.4, 2.3 observed for the other variables. And we have also tested for or included gathered information on marine exposure. So, for example, whether respondents have their work which is marine related, or whether they live close by to the sea, or whether, for example, they own a boat. And you may ask, but why did you need to, to gather all this information? We wanted to gather this information because we wanted to make sure that when we are conducting our regression analysis and we're inferring the willingness to pay estimates for the distinct BFM attributes, we wanted to parse out all the other possible effects which might affect our willingness to pay results, which are not directly attributed to the BFM attributes which we've employed in the study. So, for example, if your work is marine related, most probably you would be willing to pay simply because of the fact that you want to preserve the livelihood of your work, for example, not because you truly care about the BFM. Okay, so we wanted to parse out all those possible effects. Okay, we've run a number of different models. What I'm presenting here is just the most parsimonious, that is the best specification in terms of econometrics, which we found out of all the models we've tested. Okay, as you can notice over here, so all the attributes that we've had in this choice experiment, they are first of all statistically significant at the 99% confidence level, and they have a positive coefficient, which is in line with a priori expectations. Okay, so what we're saying over here is that respondents, they do value improvements, which is brought about by BFM. The price, as also expected, had a negative coefficient. It is statistically significant, but it has a negative coefficient sign, which is also expected. Why? Because it means that as the price is increasing, people don't want to go for the more expensive fish option if there is a cheaper alternative available. Okay, so the likelihood of choosing a more expensive fish option, you would expect that to be negative in comparison to a cheaper fish option. Okay, we did conduct all the battery of diagnostic checks which we usually conduct when we're doing these kind of studies. Okay, and we passed all the main tests, and then we've used the information which we had over here in order to translate everything into mean marginal willingness to pay estimates. Okay, and over here, for example, we found out that, for example, if the particular fish had the inclusive management label, there is willingness to pay of 268. The highest which we found was for marine life protection, which is over there. Over here, I'm just presenting the mean marginal willingness to pay estimates. What you have underneath each willingness to pay estimate is the confidence level at the 95%. So as conclusion, respondents, obviously we found that they are willing to pay above and beyond market prices to support the adoption and implementation of BFM. And this is, it provides a number of important insights to our policymakers. We did find that the majority of respondents, in fact, 80% of respondents preferred labeled fish with, in relation to a BFM as opposed to the unlabeled alternative. And this also, this study also puts things into perspectives. Okay, a BFM has a number of important pillars, but through these conclusions, we can see the trade-offs of the attributes when they are compared to each other. And definitely these findings, they do support the importance of, start integrating BFM principles into our national fisheries management strategies. There are, I would say, two limitations. So I told you that first and foremost, we had a slightly younger and more educated sample when compared to population data. We did conduct all the tests. For example, age, we found it to be statistically significant in this study. Okay, we did conduct the same estimate when we removed the age variable, and basically the results remained consistent. And we also want to, perhaps conduct other studies to sort of make sure that what we did to address the status quo selection bias is actually, robust. Okay, so what we found is also replicated in other studies. I am saying this because what we have over here is our constant, this 38.310. Okay, that is basically capturing sort of what we are interpreting as the habit formation. So if there's nothing of what we discussed about, sort of that is giving you a measure of the fact that people, there is a tendency of habit formation. They would still, there's an element of inertia, to switch from an unlabeled to a labeled alternative. And finally, the future research. So ideally, there are other studies which conduct these kind of analysis to make sure that, we have a benchmark with which we can compare our results. And also given the fact that, we've used Malta as our context, ideally, there are other sort of applications in other small island states, and also not necessarily in small island states, sort of to give us a benchmark and support for, pushing forward this BFM agenda. And this study also underscores the necessity that when you are conducting an environmental valuation, especially marine related, some people only focus on the direct use values, the value of fish or the value of certain reefs. There are other non-use values which you need to take account of, which some literature found to be even higher than the direct use value. So ideally, you should attempt a comprehensive valuation. Thank you. That's all from my end.
Thank you very much, Gilmour. That was great. Just a reminder for the audience to please put your questions into the Q&A, and maybe you can stop sharing for now, and we can just take some. I think I have some questions from the team, from the Marine Board team already, that were listening and have sent me some questions in the chat because they can't fill in the Q&A. So the first question is from Paula, and she was asking whether when you designed the study, did you ask, say, other stakeholders or say fishermen or somebody to give input on what these attributes could be, or were these attributes mainly, constrained by the academic thought that went into it?
Sure. Yes. Okay.
maybe you can take that one first, and because I think the
Yeah,
others
sure.
are.
Okay, yes. So there were actually, let's say, two waves of information which we've gathered. First and foremost, for the, let's say, the pre-testing, okay, of the definition of a BFM. No, at that point in time, there was the consortium of work package 7 from the EcoScope project, which we discussed at length of what these attributes should be, obviously motivated by literature. The consortium was made up of, experts from different fields, so not just economists, but there were, for example, also statisticians, marine biologists, etc. But what was something also very important is that we also conducted a survey with, the community stakeholders as well. If I recall well, this was also part of work package 8, if I recall well. Okay, and sort of that also added value to what we designed as attributes for these choice experiments.
Mm-hmm. And maybe I can. Well, I'll take the next question and then I'll go to mine. Paula had another question.
Sure.
She wasn't part of the study, so this is all new to her. So for the rest of us, we probably know the answers, but certainly, she said this experiment was specifically held in Malta, which is an island state and very clearly connected to the sea. To what level do you feel that the findings would apply to other European nations which may be less connected? Or is it impossible to say? And I think the answer is part of the rest of the study. So I don't know if you want to cover that now.
Yeah, sure. So the EcoScope project was actually a project which spanned not only the Mediterranean Sea, in which we've used Malta as our context, but it also spanned the Black Sea and the North Atlantic. So for the Black Sea, we've used Bulgaria as our context of study, and for the North Atlantic, we've used the UK. Obviously, we wanted to make sure that our choice experiment is realistic as possible. So, for example, dolphin fish applies for Malta, but it doesn't apply for the UK or for Bulgaria. So, if I recall well, for Bulgaria, we've used the horse mackerel, whereas for the UK, we've used the cod. We've conducted, obviously, so in Malta, for example, the different price levels, which I've explained, were conducted according both to literature, but we've also conducted a market study, of the base price which we should use for that particular fish species. We conducted something similar for Bulgaria and also for the UK. If I recall well from the results, I think we found evidence of a BFM also for the UK, but I believe for Bulgaria there was something in relation to the price variable, which, if I recall well, we did not find statistical significance of that coefficient value, and therefore we couldn't infer the willingness to pay results. But for the UK, we did find evidence of a BFM, that people were willing to pay a premium for a BFM attributes. And what I should also mention was that for the UK, we've collected 2 waves of data, and we did conduct the analysis over 2 waves of data, and the 2 waves of data support what I've just presented over here.
Mm-hmm. And if I recall well, I think in different countries there were different alternative versions of EBFM that was, so for instance, I think in Malta it was really about protecting marine life, but in the UK it was, there were some differences, but in the end it basically means the same
Yes.
thing. And the other thing that I was wondering if you think that these results could help us to find different ways of making people understand what EBFM means. If protecting marine life is also a form of EBFM, is it better to use that as a label than EBFM on a fish, do you think?
Yes, so one of the questions which we've had in the questionnaire was actually we've tested respondents' knowledge of what a BFM is.
Mm-hmm.
And I recall I was trying to get my head around as to how I could potentially code this variable, you know, because there were a lot of people who said, for example, that, okay, yes, I know what it is. And then we had sort of an open-ended question to actually, you know, tell us, okay, what do you understand by a BFM? And most of the results were actually not the correct interpretation of a BFM. So only the minority managed to, you know, provide us a good interpretation, a good definition of what a BFM is. Definitely these attributes help. So the fact that, you know, you can say, you know, no, not even sustainable stock, no overfishing, you know, sensitive and vulnerable species, the impact on them is minimized. Those are the kinds of things that people understand rather than, you know, than a BFM. To be honest with you, when I was doing my literature review and you know, trying to get my head around of, you know, how can I find a comprehensive definition of a BFM? Even in literature, this is not a straightforward task. In fact, even the checklist criteria, for example, which is provided by Long et al. And Trochta, there are some different missing reasons. So I think we're still completely missing you know, a consensus of what a BFM is. So I think we should rather stick to, you know, these kind of easy labels which the public can relate to.
Yeah, and maybe if we are, I mean, if we're working in an academic situation and we kind of have a definition for what we believe EBFM is, and that's what we work on, that's one thing. But when you're speaking to the public, you should really stick to, you know, terms and
Yes.
things that they're comfortable with. And in the end, I think sometimes scientists try to be so specific that it really it's lost in translation, and you kind of lose the people you're speaking to, because you don't just, you know, come up with something that really works most of the time.
Yes.
I think. Yeah. And then Anna also has a question. Do you think that the results would have been different if the median age was not slightly younger than the average population, or slightly more educated?
Yes, we've tested this actually. So we did test the model with the age included, with the educational level included and also excluded. In the case of the educational level, when tested sort of on its own, and also when tested in an environment where we've multiplied it as sort of multiplicative variable with all the other variables of significance, we did not find any evidence that would change the results. So the results remained robust throughout. For the age variable, we also conducted this test because on its own, it showed that it is statistically significant. In fact, a lot of the variables which turned out to be important were also tested against age, but more or less the results remained robust throughout.
And then I still haven't had any questions from the people online, although I see there's still some people online, so that's good to know. But maybe I will go with a more out of left field question for you. Given that you're working, you know, in Malta, you're not just a PhD student, you actually have a job, a real job.
Yeah.
Do you think these results will help you in your job? Do you think it's really helped you to understand, you know, the way people perceive fish in Malta?
Yeah, definitely. To be honest with you, I work in a different setting. So I work at the Malta Fiscal Advisory Council, which is, you know, a completely different animal. But for a good number of years, I used to form part of the planning board. So I'm not going to answer this question per se vis-a-vis fish,
Yeah.
but when it comes to, you know, in general, valuing the environment, you know, coming up with a good balance as to how, whether, you know, we should just focus on the economy, and the economy, I mean GDP, you know, because a true economist would define the economy also incorporating the environment, as opposed to the true definition of what economics is all about. And I think it definitely sheds some light over there. I mean, a lot of people are still viewing the environment as a secondary to the Maltese economy. And I think that's the general perception in Malta. hopefully we'll start seeing some changes. Personally, yes, that was the experience I gained from the sport was, definitely opened my eyes on this issue, which is why I pursued a PhD in this area, to be honest with you. Hopefully this study, would give me some leverage with which I can, push forward this agenda, basically.
And then Paula has another question. She has lots of questions.
Great.
She's always good with questions.
Yeah.
How easy is it to define some of the attributes for different fish species? So, we've used here commercial species, obviously, because that's what people would buy. But is this information generally well known? As she says, she's not a fish person, so she. So yeah,
I mean, with regards to the fishing practices, you mean?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, I mean, in Malta, what we usually know, people perhaps are not as well informed. I would state that, the possible, for example, impacts that any, unsustainable fishing activity could have on the marine environment. But I think what is perhaps a bit clear, it's the fact that, when you go to your usual fishmonger or to your fish shop, for example, there is a particular fish species, the sea bream, in which sort of the fishmonger would ask, do you want the wild one or do you want the farmed one? And from there, usually a discussion of, what's the difference? I mean, which one should I prefer, the farmed one or the wild one? From there, I usually hear that a discussion starts unfolding. This one was caught from, it was kept in a fish farm. If perhaps you have some time to go over the Maltese news at the moment, to have an issue with regards to the slime, which is polluting our coastal areas. So this is perhaps shedding this is stressing a bit the fact that when you are not conducting your fishing, or if you don't have aquaculture at the highest standards, you could have these pollutant effects occurring, which is sort of a nuisance to people who go by the sea for the recreational activities. So I think that is, what is at the moment, I think, common for people to know, whether they are aware of, the possible, what is really happening by employing certain fishing activities as opposed to other. I don't think it's not a general information which the public has. No.
Yeah, I think there's still quite a bit of work that needs to be done for people to understand the differences, for instance, between farmed fish or wild caught fish, and also the positives and negatives for both, because both of these have issues. And then the other environmental impacts that might come from the other things that we do in the ocean. So I think there's definitely a lot of work to be done there. I don't see any other questions, but I do want to say thank you very much. It was a really great discussion, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the paper. And to remind people that we actually have a policy brief out from EcoScope that have given a little bit of the overview of these results, like, what is EBFM? There's a little bit of information on that from the different countries, and it's very interesting that there are differences in the different countries. So people could definitely have a read of that if they're interested, and it's a good overview. So I'm looking forward to the paper that hopefully will come out soon.
Yeah. Yeah, I do hope so.
Yeah, and good luck for the PhD. When is it supposed to be finishing?
In 3 years' time. So do it on a part-time basis. So yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So then I think I still have one more slide to share. Just to say again, thank you very much for your talk, and to remind the rest of the people that our next speaker will be Ruanthi Gajadera, who is one of our artists in residence, who will speak next month on Thursday, the 18th of September, on the work that she did for her artist in residence on textile and fashion. The webinar will be on Save Our Seas, her project that she had for the Embracing the Ocean artist in residence. So thank you everybody for listening, and I really look forward to seeing you again next month. And thank you again, Gilmour, for a great presentation. So thanks.